An emotion is a call for an action. Your mind is trying to get something done. You can't sabotage yourself. The brain is survival based. What you did for me for my childhood trauma was more impactful.
It's trying to tell you something. It's trying to send a message to you. We just haven't learned how to listen.
Hey, I'm Mike Oglesbee, and welcome to my podcast, What's the Gift? As a successful coach, I've helped thousands of people turn their obstacles into opportunities. As someone who's seen the bottom and felt despair, I know that my life transformed when I stopped playing the victim and looked for how to turn those challenges into game-changing life situations. Each week on my show, I'll help you identify the gift within the things that have kept you down and interview some of the most successful business folks in the world on how they did the same. Welcome to What's the Gift?
Hey, today we're sitting down with Dr. Don Wood, founder of the Inspired Performance Institute and creator of the TIPP Method, TIPP, a neuroscience-based approach designed to help people identify and rewire the patterns in the brain that are keeping them stuck. His work focuses on something most people overlook, that many of the challenges we face today are being driven by unresolved experiences from the past that are still shaping how we think, feel, and react. And today, we're going to break down what that means and how someone can actually begin to change it. Dr. Don, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. What's something you've seen in people over and over again that they think is a mindset problem, but is actually coming from something deeper in the brain?
Well, it's a lot of times they don't even realize they have a problem. They're just, going through life and experiencing life as it is, and then there's a deeper problem. But a lot of that comes from childhood. So between the ages of 0 and 7, your mind is literal. So it takes in all the information literally. So if somebody tells you you're stupid or constantly reinforcing a particular behavior, your brain records that. And then it starts to develop codes or what I call codes, which are habits or behaviors. But the brain codes it to keep that accurate. Because your subconscious mind, your brain doesn't understand the difference between real or imagined, doesn't understand good or bad, right or wrong. It just takes in everything literally.
So what you're saying is basically we're just a bunch of grown-up kids running around repeating what we've been told and shown. And basically that we're completely oblivious to that. So when you say that, people don't usually know that this is even going on. They just think this is life. How do they come to that point to find someone like you to even find out to know or to even realize that, hold on, something's wrong? What does that typically look like on your end?
Well, generally they've been dealing with, anxiety, depression, things like that. And they have an idea that that's happening. But they think there's a chemical imbalance in the brain. And what I look at is, why is there a chemical imbalance in the brain? Mm-hmm. Right? It didn't start off that way. Right? So our brain is perfectly designed, right, to operate under optimal conditions. But it doesn't operate under those optimal conditions. And then it just repeats itself. So a lot of times what I say to people is, when you think about something that happened to you when you were little, when you were 5 or 6 or 7, right, do you feel an emotion? And they'll usually say, well, yeah, I do. I get emotional when I think about that. And I say, that's a glitch. An emotion is a call for an action. So the purpose of fear is to escape a threat. The purpose of anger is to attack a threat in the moment. So if you think of fear when you think about something 20 years ago and you feel fear, that's a glitch. Your mind is trying to get something done. It's trying to fix the 5-year-old because it doesn't understand time. And so all these people are glitching, and they don't know it. They just feel like
term, glitching.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's just a glitch. And then we reboot that glitch. So it's just like going in and and defragging a computer. So all of those error messages, those glitches have built up, and your mind operates with them, and it builds codes around them. And so then it's going to build that code in order to protect you. So a lot of times people say to me, oh, I sabotage myself all the time. And I say, it's impossible. You can't sabotage yourself. The brain is survival based. It's doing everything for a reason. What is the reason? And it generally is dealing with the error message.
You know, there's two things that stick out really that, come to my mind. You talked about people say that they have this chemical imbalance. And this has fascinated me because I've done some research on this. And what I found, surprisingly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is that there's never actually been a single case in all of history where a true chemical balance has been found.
Right. You're right. But they think that's what it is. So I always say, why would the brain become imbalanced? Why would there be a chemical? Because your brain is just full of chemicals. It's always producing chemicals. So why would it go out of balance? There must be a reason, but it's generally not that.
And we hear about this. I've worked with a lot of people who, say they're bipolar or have this other condition, and they've been told they have a chemical imbalance. And it just becomes this like natural common term and an idea that people have just bought into. Why do you think that is?
Well, they're looking for a reason. Why are they dealing with this? There must be something wrong. They must be broken, defeated. There's something going on that's creating it. But it's their own system that's creating it. And so all you have to do is figure out what is it trying to accomplish and then deal with that. And generally it's dealing with an error message. I'm not good enough. I'm not, pretty enough. Whatever it is, that started very early in life. And then the brain builds around that.
So you talked about going back and these glitches and this time frame from 0 to 7 where everything's taken literal. So is your method based on kind of like what we would commonly hear as like inner child work? And if not, how is it different?
No, well, I generally talk about most of the traumas come in from childhood, but it's not always the case. So I worked with Rebecca Gregory, who is at the Boston Marathon. She lost her left leg. She was 4 feet from the first bomb that went off.
Wow.
And it blew off her leg. So she was 5.5 years dealing with post-traumatic stress. So after 5.5 years, she heard about what I do. And she says, I heard that you can clear post-traumatic stress in 4 hours. She says, that sounds too good to be true. But I'm desperate. I have a terror nightmare every single night. So I took her through the process. It's a 4-hour process. I took her through the process. And the first 2 hours is all science and education. I describe how the mind works, right? I don't even talk about trauma. So after 2 hours, then I start working on the trauma because we get the brain into optimal condition to start healing. It won't heal when it doesn't feel safe. Mm-hmm. So I've got to create that safety in order to get the mind to start looking at everything. And it gets into a metacognitive state. So she went through, after 5.5 years, went through the program, eliminated her post-traumatic stress. But the thing that she said that was interesting to me, she said, I thought I was coming here because of the Boston Marathon bombing. She says, but what you did for me for my childhood trauma was more impactful. I didn't realize all of that was affecting me. The Boston Marathon was just the cherry on top, that it just magnified it.
Can you, for those people that don't really understand, technical language and are very new to these ideas, can you describe what you mean by metacognitive stage?
Yeah. So the metacognitive state is basically alpha brainwave state. So we get the mind relaxed enough that it goes into an observer role. So instead of being in it, it can observe it. So it then takes it from being in it to observing it, and then we can change it. And so it's actually the highest form of intelligence. If you can do that, it's better than IQ, better than all the different things that you can do. If you can train your brain to go into a metacognitive state, that's how you repair it. And it's very simple to do, but you can learn to do it. That's what I do for them in the 4 hours.
So you actually teach them as well. You're not just doing something for them. You're giving something that will go on with them, that they can actually kind of like a maintenance for themselves.
Yeah. So they do the 4 hours, then they do 30 days of audios. That's designed to get, so the trauma is stored in explicit memory. So all the details of the event are stored in high definition, very bright, very intense. So what I do is when you get into that optimal conditions, right, after 2 hours, right, we haven't even talked about your trauma yet. You're just getting educated on the science of it. And people say to me all the time, gosh, this makes so much sense. Why has nobody ever explained that to me? There's nothing wrong with them. Their brain naturally does this. It's trying to protect them. So then we work on the traumas, but by that point, they're in an alpha brainwave state. So then the last hour is working on performance. Now we want to get them performing at their highest level. So they've gone through the whole program, then 30 days is designed to then correct the codes that got built. So you have the experience, and then your mind builds up codes or habits and behaviors to then adapt to that code. But it doesn't need to. Now when we've got the traumatic event cleared, it's easy to change the codes.
That's so cool. Let me ask you, you talk about the alpha brain, and one of the things that I do in my business and have for 15 years is hypnotherapy. And so that's really a process of taking people down into the lower brainwave states. Alpha, if all we can get to is alpha, that's fine, but sometimes we'll go into theta, and sometimes people fall asleep and things like that. So is this kind of like a combo that includes some type or form of like a hypnotic trance?
Well, it's really going into alpha. Theta goes, or hypnotherapy goes into theta, which is even deeper. So I don't need to go that deep. I can stay in alpha, which they're very awake, they're alert, they talk, right, the whole time. So I studied 500 hours of research on hypnotherapy. And so what I did is that then I took all the different protocols and I created the best of them. And that's the TIPP program, and it's alpha brainwave state.
That's very cool. So let me ask you, like, what does this like actually look like in real life for someone? Like going through this process, like even if you're allowed to share, the particular lady you were talking about with the Boston Marathon, but what does this actually look like? Somebody calls you out of the blue, they've been struggling with anxiety or depression or something like that, and nothing else seems to work. What does that look like? Like, walk me through the steps of what that would look like in a real world scenario.
So we'll talk about Rebecca. When Rebecca first came in, she'd heard about the program. She said to me, she says, it sounds too good to be true, but I'm desperate. I've tried everything, right? And nothing has seemed to work. And so doing that, then what happens is I said to her, she started to share the story. I don't even need to know what the story is. I did know hers, but she started to talk about what happened to her. And she started to shake and cry. And I said, Rebecca, do you know why you're shaking and crying right now? And she said, well, because I'm talking about what happened to me. And I said, right, but your mind thinks that there's a bomb about to go off. And it's trying to warn you and protect you. Your mind is working on 5.5 years ago. Your subconscious mind doesn't understand time. It's a conscious thought process. But subconscious operates in the now. So it's looking at the old memory in real time. And so I described that to her, and then I described how the brain works. And all you have to do is get the brain to feel safe, because it hasn't felt safe the whole time. And for her, it hadn't felt safe since her childhood. because of the trauma in that. So it keeps on looping through that to respond to what's happening now. That's going to affect the way you behave. And so, and that's what I talk to them about. And then I share my story. So I grew up in an idyllic childhood. I never had any trauma, like really. I was adopted too. So I was adopted at birth. My parents picked me up from the hospital. I had an older brother, who was 10 years and an older sister that was 7 years older. And we all grew up in that house. My parents never argued, never fought, never hit us. And so if we did something wrong, we were disciplined, but it was never done in anger. So that regulated my nervous system. I was always feeling safe in the home. So I could get bumped when I was out of the home, but when I come back into the home, I feel totally safe. And so that keeps your nervous system regulated. And that's the key to good health. I never get sick. I've been healthy my entire life. And my brother and sister, who are no genetic connection to me, have never been sick. So I've got a fascinating story on that.
I want to hear it. I want to hear it. Let's go. Let's do it.
So I always grew up with this idyllic childhood. So I found out, I knew I was adopted from birth. There was never a secret. And so my daughter got sick, so I started to do some research. That's how I got into all this. And so my wife said to me, you need to figure this out or we're going to lose our daughter. So she says, you need to find out if this is a genetic thing, if it's hereditary. So my mother had told me that when I was 18, that our family doctor was my grandfather. And so I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I thought everybody's family doctor came over for breakfast on Sunday, and everybody goes to their family doctor's farm like that. I just thought that was normal.
Yeah,
and
sure.
So I always knew that. So he had passed away. So I started looking for answers, and I thought I didn't want to disrupt the family. Like I didn't want to then call out of the blue, by the way, I'm your son. Right, so I thought I'll go, around the back door. So who I thought he had 2 daughters, so we were pretty sure it was one of the daughters. So I contacted the niece, and I said to her, I told her the story that I was adopted, and so she said, and I said, and your aunt is my mother, but I don't want to disturb her. Can you just check and see if there's a family history of the disease that my daughter had? She had Crohn's at that time, and then she had pulmonary hemosiderosis, idiopathic. And so those 2 autoimmune disorders were affecting her life. So she said, okay, I'll check. I didn't know my aunt had a baby. She checked with the aunt, and she came back and said, I don't know how to tell you this, but my aunt denied it. She's not your mother. And so that devastated me because I thought, what is the story then? Was my mother wrong? And then she called me back about a week later and said, my aunt did some research and there's no family history of it. So I thought, is she telling me she's my mother or not telling me she's my mother? And so a number of years went by. And then when my daughter developed the second autoimmune, I did a DNA test. And I discovered that the family doctor wasn't my grandfather. He was my father. And he had come to my parents and said, will you adopt this child? They just assumed his daughter had a child. But he had a child out of wedlock. Right? And he was married, he had 2 daughters, and so he came to them and said, will you adopt this child? So then I got the history of it. So my mother had 3 children before I was born. I'm the middle one of 7. So she had 3 children before, and of those children, she in a very, very abusive home. A lot of violence, a lot of trauma. She just walked out and left the 3 kids, just abandoned them. And then got pregnant with me with Dr. Rowley, right? And then gave me up for adoption. And then she went out 2 years later, got married into a similar marriage with all kinds of abuse, and had 3 more children. So I discovered that the 3 children that were born before me, 2 have died of cancer. The third one has a heart condition. All 3 were addicted. The 3 that were born after me, 2 have died. All 3 were addicted. I've never had a drink in my life, never touched a drug in my life. What was the difference? Nurture.
Environment.
It's not genetics. The genes respond to its environment. And so whatever you're predisposed to will adapt. But that was the perfect experiment. I couldn't have created that. 6 of 7 children all have illnesses, addictions. I have none. The difference was I grew up in the idyllic childhood.
So it's almost psychosomatic, a lot of it.
Yeah. So while they're constantly dealing with this trauma, they get addicted because they're trying to feel better. They're looking for an escape, right? It's a resource. So I deal with a lot of people in addiction, and I get them out of addiction because I explain to them that your mind is trying to fix the problem. It can't fix it. And so you just drink and you numb yourself, right? Yeah. And that's going to happen automatically. So it takes the shame and guilt out of it. And I explain the process that the brain goes through and how it develops that addiction. And it just gets people out of it. They just go, wow, that makes so much sense. You couldn't have done it any other way. So the story was that I had this great childhood. I met my wife when I was 18, and she grew up in a very traumatic household. A very violent father. So she didn't get into drugs or alcohol, but she was always living in fear. So if I would say to her, no, I don't really like that, she would tear up and start to cry and say, why are you mad at me? And I'd go, what do you mean I'm not mad? She'd go, yeah, you're getting mad. Why? She could hear the slightest little change in my vocal tone. And she would pick that up like, you're getting mad at me. And
like
so
she's hypersensitive as a protection device.
As a protection device. Yep.
Yeah.
And so I did everything I could do to avoid that. I tried to change my words. I tried to control everything. I could still set it off. So she's a great mom, a great wife. I'm still married to her. So we got 3 children when we're 30 years old. Right? We're living in our dream home. We've got everything going for us, and she's not enjoying it. And I would say, what is wrong with this picture? And she'd say, I don't know. She's grateful and appreciative, but she was waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Oh, yeah.
When's this going to end? Because it always would with her father. So she was waiting for that to happen and waiting for me to leave or waiting for me to abandon her or whatever. That was from her childhood. So then of our 3 children, our middle child, Ashley, when she was 13, was diagnosed with Crohn's. They told us, we don't know what causes Crohn's. There's no cure for Crohn's. She's going to have to learn to live and manage with this for the rest of her life. And then when she was much older, she got a second autoimmune called idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis, which is where the lungs fill up with blood. And she had to be rushed to the hospital, and they had her in ICU for 3.5 weeks. And that's when they came back with that diagnosis. The doctor said, we don't know what causes it, and there's no cure for it. She's going to have to learn to manage this for the rest of her life. And that's when my wife said to me, if you don't figure this out, we're going to lose our daughter. And I went back and did all the research. And I put together this program based on that trauma, unresolved trauma, creates inflammation. Inflammation is a response to trauma. So if you punch me in the arm, my arm's going to swell up, right? It's a cell danger response to protect the body. So the cells become hardened and inflamed to protect anything from penetrating it. So, and then when you stop hitting me, the swelling eventually goes down, the immune system comes back. So I've done a study on this that I tested people pre and post of our program. So the pre-test was on DNA, so on inflammation, IL-6, CRP, and then on immunity. So that was what we were looking for. 100% of the people, when I cleared their trauma, right, their inflammation dropped between 50 and 100%, and their inflammation came up about 50%.
Wow.
So,
That's impressive.
Yeah. And so it was all across the board. There's a huge change in the inflammation because there's still, your mind is still responding to the trauma. And so it's operating in real time. So my daughter now that I've taken her through the program, no Crohn's, no lung disorder. And the doctor said, that's impossible. If that was true, you'd have a Nobel Prize. And so I said to him, I said, well, what's Crohn's? He says, Crohn's is a lifelong disease with no known cure. I said, I disagree. Crohn's is just inflammation. And inflammation is caused by the trauma. The mind is constantly cycling through it and thinking it needs a response to it. So in 2025, the Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded to 3 scientists who discovered that the cause of autoimmune is the FOXP3 gene getting activated, and then this is exactly what I've said. So the FOXP3 gene creates the inflammation that turns down the regulatory T cells, the Tregs. And so that's a perfect recipe for disease because it stays in that position.
So what does that actually mean? Like to somebody that doesn't know anything about this, like you talk about the FOX3P and stuff like, can you put that in like layman's terms?
Yeah. So when you have inflammation, the body is going to automatically respond to it. Your genes adapt. So your genes are going to say, okay, we've got a problem here. We need to protect the system. And so the FOXP3 gene turns on. So your genes are always turning on and off. So the FOXP3 gene turns on. When that goes on, your regulatory T cells or Tregs turn low. But those are the things you need to fight disease or cancer. So that's low, your inflammation's high. It's supposed to be a temporary response until the trauma's over. But trauma keeps running. And we're the only
loops in the mind, keep it going.
Yeah. And it keeps looping. So the FOXP3 gene stays active, right? The T cells stay low, right? You can drive a truck full of disease through that opening. There's no immunity. That's the autoimmune. And then they get sick. I believe 80% of all the illnesses that we're dealing with are a result of psychological. Only 20%.
I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that, yeah.
And
that's one of the primary things we need, right, is safety. We need to feel secure. It's innate. And when we don't feel secure, what you're saying is that we have these loops that we get stuck in, and we're not really consciously aware of it. We're not focused on that, but it's always playing in the background, always kind of emitting like radiating, sending these signals out. And so your body, through like the autonomic nervous system, is constantly responding, even though your consciousness is over here focused on, the real world interactions through your senses. But you've got this radiating signal that, hey, this is dangerous and we gotta stay protected. And so you're always in this inflammation. And then that becomes conscious in the form of disease and, you're collapsing in real life and anxieties and things like that.
That's right. It's so simple, right? All you have to do is create the nervous system to calm down. And when it calms down, the best way to do that is to eliminate, right, the high definition trauma in the mind, and then the mind goes into a safety mode. It's perfectly designed to do it, but they don't know.
So are
that.
you like like, how are you, and of course, I mean, you have your process, but just in a kind of an overall, I guess, nutshell of it, are you, to break that down, are you pulling the emotional charge that kind of holds it in place off first, and then like changing the association, the idea of it? Because the memory's still there, you're just discharging it, right?
That's right. So what we do, for example, we're the only animal that stores two memories. We store associative memory. That's how the animals learn. They've associated this memory with an outcome, but they don't store the information about it. They just know men are dangerous, this area is dangerous, but they don't store information about it. We have that memory system. It's how we learn how to ride a bike, play a guitar. You repeat it enough times, it learns the association. But we store explicit memory. Everything that you've ever seen, heard, touched, or smelt has been recorded and stored in this explicit memory. So if I asked you what you ate for dinner last night, can you tell me what you ate for dinner?
If I thought about it, yes, I can tell you. Yeah.
Okay, so what did you have?
I had ham and beans and rice.
Right. So you looked up, right, and you saw
Yes.
pictures, right, of what you ate.
Yep.
Yeah. Last night wasn't disturbing or traumatic, so it was stored as a fairly low resolution file. But if that had been a traumatic event, something threatening, it's stored in tremendous detail. Your sight, your smell, your hearing are all intensified. So it records it in the memory system, very bright, very intense. So then when you recall it, your subconscious mind operates in the present. It's recalling a very high definition memory. It thinks it's real. It activates the nervous system. And that's gone
when we remember
constantly.
something, it's not always the necessarily the event that we remember. Sometimes it could be a distorted version of reality, right?
Yeah. But regardless of which way it is, it's still going to activate the nervous system. I never use the word trigger. I never liked that word. I said it sounds negative and violent. I said your nervous
it's
system.
associated with a gun.
Yeah. Your nervous system activates. It's supposed to activate when there's a threat. So if a guy, shows up and is threatening you, you should have an active nervous system to protect you. But it shouldn't activate when you think about that guy 10 years ago doing it. That's the glitch. So what I do is we work on some memories that are in high definition, and I get your mind to reprocess it into low definition. And so people who have had, serious traumas, they think about it afterwards, and they're like, yeah, it has no emotion. The emotion comes from the memory. So there's no emotion, right? Because the memory wasn't threatening.
This is fascinating because a lot of people, I think, that I see, they don't just go through their traumas and they don't just go through their life. They identify with that. And so, what's a moment that you've seen where someone realized, like, hey, this isn't just who I am. This is something I can actually change. What does
a lot of people
like for them?
Yeah, it's amazing because when you first you explain the science in education, and I tell them what we're going to do, and they're just saying, if you can do that, that's amazing. Then I demonstrate it, and then as I do it, like I'll give you an example. I worked with a U.S. Army sniper. He had to shoot and kill a 12-year-old boy. That was the most dramatic. So he was ordered to shoot him. And so he suffered for 8 years with this. And he was medicated at the VA. It was terrible. And he said, I can't talk about this anymore. And I said, that's okay. I don't need you to talk about it. Yeah. And he says, well, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to fix it. He said, well, how are we going to fix it if I don't talk about it? I just need him to recall it in his mind, right, for about 2 minutes. And a minute or 2 minutes. And then I get the mind to reprocess it. It realizes you're not there now. And then it reprocesses it. So by the time we finished it, I says, now go back over that memory and tell me what you're feeling. And he said, how the bleep did you do this? He says, I'm not feeling anything now. I'm sad, but I'm not feeling the emotions that I felt before. And he says, how did you do that? And I says, I didn't do anything. For 8 years, your mind has been trying to get you not to pull the trigger. It was trying to stop you from pulling the trigger. You couldn't do that, and it kept looping and looping. We took the loop out.
That's fascinating. You know, the other day I actually worked with a guy. He came to me for claustrophobia, and he wants to fly airplanes, and he started working on getting his pilot's license. And he just kept, feeling more and more of this anxiety coming up. So he comes in. I said, okay, and we get to talking about things, and he starts talking about this moment when he was 18 years old, and he was a young boy under a house, and he kicked up this dust. He was doing some kind of work. I can't remember what he said, but he kicked up this dust, and he felt like he couldn't breathe, and he freaked out, and he said, that was the first time I felt this. I said, boom, there you go.
There it is.
This is just your mind bringing this up, saying, hey, there's something stuck here. And so I took him through this process and where he was able to kind of reparent that kid and separate himself, but let him kind of go through it, but then separate himself. And then I took him into this, into the cockpit, right? And so now he's flying the plane, and he looks over, he sees his wife, and he looks back and he sees his 4 kids. And by the time we were done, it was just completely reassociated. And of course, that's not probably the type of traumas that, you could easily do something at, the smaller traumas. You go into the deep traumas, which is absolutely fascinating, because I've seen some cases, man, that it's like you just barely get these little glimpses of the person being able to feel stabilized, but they're always in this high, fight or flight state. And it's hard to even work with a mindset with someone who is so very deeply stuck in that place. But that's something that you deal with, right?
Yeah. Well, we deal with both. I call they're not big T traumas. I call them emotional concussions. And it could be that coach that said something to you when you're really young that stuck with you, and then you constantly repeat that. I'm just not good enough. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to, all those things. Your mind is going to figure out how to get that done, right? It believes it. And then those beliefs get stuck. So
this is fascinating, and it kind of clears up some things that I've gone through my whole life, because, my work is based on my journey of healing. I grew up in an environment that I didn't feel safe in, always getting bullied and embarrassed and humiliated and made fun of. I still remember I was 3 years old, and this little kid at the nursery stepped on my pinky, and it crushed it. And so I had to go to the hospital, get this little metal cast on my finger. And I remember me and my mom pulled up to the house in the evening, and I didn't want to get out of the car because I was afraid that if I go in the house, I was going to get made fun of. And, those first 6 to 7 years of my life, it's like you spend, once you become aware of this, you spend so much time just trying to dissociate from that little person who was so traumatized so you could have, a normal life. And I'm so fortunate and blessed that I've been able to figure a lot of that out for myself along my way. But it's been a long journey, certainly no 4-hour journey by far. And I love that you're able to go in so quickly and do that. I think it's such important work.
Well, that's the one thing when we finish the session, I've had people cry, and I'll say, why are you crying? They're saying, why did it take me so long to find you? I've spent years in therapy, right?
Yeah.
And they never get to that. So they're just so excited to be through it. And I've dealt with all kinds of people who have dealt with the Vegas shooting victim, for example. In that Vegas shooting, the lady who ran the entire concert, she had spent a year in therapy and nothing worked. She was quitting her job. She was moving on. And they asked me would I drop in to see her in Las Vegas when I was going out to Lake Tahoe. And so I did, and I took her through it. And she still today, she says, I can't believe it's not that we're going for happy about it. We're just trying to take the emotions out of it. The sad is okay, but the emotion that your mind is trying to get you to do something. And that's what she was dealing with. She says, now it's there, but I don't see it the same way.
Wow. I find that so many people, when they go through traumas and difficult times in their life and they struggle with things like this, on the other side, when they get through that and they've healed that and they've been able to reform their character and their identity to something that's not based on that struggle or that trauma, that they're then able to use all that trauma and all of those things that they went to as like a gift. They're able to use those experiences to move them in ways that maybe they never had access, to before going through that. So in your experience, whether it's personal or maybe one of the people that you've worked with, what does that do for them? How do they use that to actually, like as a gift, as an opportunity for something to make their life even better, having gone through that?
Well, I worked with Scott Mann, who's a former Green Beret Special Forces. So he's served tours in Afghanistan and Iraq and everything. And so he had post-traumatic stress after all that. So he actually almost committed suicide. He had a gun in his mouth, was going to pull the trigger, and his son came in and he didn't. But he was dealing with all of those events, losing his buddies, all those things. And so I took him through the program, and his testimonial is on our site. And what he said was, and he's on Fox News all the time. So he's always speaking and talking. He's done all kinds of great stuff. But he said, after going through the TIPP program, I felt like my toes uncurled. That was such a great way of saying it. He wasn't constantly tensed up. And he just felt like he just went, it was over.
Wow.
And that's what he got out of it.
When someone comes out of that, do you find that they have to learn how to live again? As this person that's free?
Yeah. No, they adopt it because that's naturally who they are. They've always been that person. So we're just getting them back to baseline, right? So we're not changing them. We're just eliminating what has interfered with them staying at that base. And so they just get tremendous. It actually affects neuroplasticity too. We did a study on that. We did QEEG pre and post. So there's a gene that affects neuroplasticity, the BDNF gene. And when you have trauma, that BDNF gene is lowered. So people who say, I can't remember anything. And my wife was like that. She said, when I first met her, she said, I have to read a page in a book 3 times before I absorb it, right? And so it was because of that gene. And I said, the reason why that happens is if you're trying to read a book while you're being chased by a lion, how much of the book are you going to be able to absorb? You're not. And so you're constantly in that stress mode. So my wife went through the program as well. She's my best researcher. She's phenomenal. She can remember everything. She's incredible, right?
Which is wonderful until you do something wrong and she pulls it out and Rolodex and throws it at you.
She can remember it when she was traumatized, and now she still does.
So, Dr. Don, someone listening right now that feels stuck in patterns that they can't break, what's the first thing that they need to understand?
That there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with their mind. They're not broken. They're not defeated. They're just dealing with these glitches, and you can clear those up. The great part about neuroplasticity is from the study that we did, the youngest was 15, the oldest was 63. There was all kinds of ranges in there. And we measured their neuroplasticity before and measured it afterwards. So the guy who came in I hired an independent guy to do the numbers because I don't want to do my own numbers for the study. So he had been doing this for 30 years. And he said, I heard about what you're doing. He says, I'm going to be honest with you. You're not going to get that much change that fast. He says, if you get a 10% change in plasticity, he says, that would be a home run. I don't know if you're going to get 10%, but I'm just going to provide the numbers, and then you do with it what you want. We got 46.5% change.
Wow. Phenomenal.
The brain is designed to heal. It was just that trauma is interfering with it. So we've got the data to prove it, that it actually works. And we've got lots of testimonials. So I was doing just the testimonials. Those are great, but they're subjective, right? The DNA and the neuroplasticity is absolute proof.
Wow. That's powerful. So, I work with people on their mindset and how they're interpreting things or how they associate. Because I always say, how you look at something, that perspective, that translates into an experience, and which is why it's so individual for all of us. And you're going deeper into what's actually creating those reactions in the first place. So how do those two things work together?
Well, if you get to the root cause, which is what's causing it, then you can heal everything else. So this would be even more effective for you because you're doing great work, right? You're healing people, and that's really great. But they still have that root cause, right? And so if you can get to that root cause, that's the fastest way to get there.
Yeah. And, a lot of times people typically will start out in therapy. And I think traditional therapy can be great if you have a really good therapist, but we don't see a whole lot of that. So I typically see a very, very low success rate with traditional therapy. And I don't necessarily agree with the modality of sitting and talking about the problems. I think that's a great way to reinforce the loops.
You just reinforce it. Yeah, that's
right. You're just giving it. It's almost like the more you talk about it, the more details you add to that story. And what I help people do is really live from the present moment. And because the past doesn't exist, the patterns from the past exist. And that's what you're really attacking, is pulling the pattern out, because you can't actually change the past because, it just doesn't exist. It's just that memory, like a bite, and so we can attack and address that. But it's absolutely fascinating, because I think what you and I do works so hand in hand, and we're both seeking that same, that same piece of the puzzle, and that's what has to happen. Yeah.
You have to get to the root cause, and then it's much more dramatic, their effects. So we can work together, and we have an online program that people can do the whole 4 hours online. You can have them go through that, and then you work with them. You'll get tremendous results.
That's phenomenal. So they don't have to come to where you are personally. No. You can reach people anywhere
in the world. So we had people from Australia, Germany, wherever doing it, and they get the same results. And that's just the best way to do it. We have a functional medicine doctor who works with Parkinson's patients. He buys the online program for everybody who's going through his program, because he says, you do this first, then I'll work with you. And he gets better results.
Because I've got some people that, instantly, some people that are just so stuck. Because when someone's so stuck, you can barely work with their mindset. You have to wait till they have a really good day. And I don't work with a lot of people that are in those deep cycles, because it's almost like they're in the emergency and crisis mode so much that it takes a very different kind of person to sit with that on a daily basis,
Yeah.
So I like to work with the high achievers and stuff, but I do occasionally work with people that are in those deep states. So I love the fact that you can do this virtually. That was a big question that I had. But Dr. Don, so for those who are listening that want to learn more about your work or connect with you personally, what's the best way for them to find you?
Basically, look up our website, which is Inspired Performance Institute. That's inspired with a D. We've got all our stuff on there. We've got an AI version of me. You can actually talk to it and ask it questions. It does everything. It's really, I say they're going to get rid of me eventually because they got my AI doing everything now. Like they answer their own blog, like they write a blog that just go ask my AI, right? So it's got all of my material, all my talks, all my blogs, everything that I've written, and it doesn't bring anything in from outside. So it's just my material.
It's a closed system. It is Dr. Don Wood, yep. AI all the way.
All the time. So people can go and listen to that and just have a chat with it. My daughter, actually, when we built it, she said, I'm going to go in and ask it what he thinks of his daughter. And so she went in and said, what does he say about my daughter? What do you say about your daughter? And it talked very nicely. She goes, that's so cool.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Dr. Don Wood, man, I appreciate you being here. What a phenomenal conversation. I think the work that you're doing is powerful. It's necessary. It's life-changing. And, man, I am rooting for you with that Nobel Prize, my friend.
Yeah, that would be great. It definitely is what is the cause. Everybody says inflammation is at the root cause of all disease. Trauma is at the root cause, and inflammation is the response.
Yeah, and I find that so often people are trying to address symptoms when they need to be addressing the problems. And if you don't address the problems, you just have a recurrence of the symptoms. And you may get rid of this symptom, but another one's going to take its place. It's trying to tell you something. It's trying to send a message to you. We just haven't learned how to listen.
Yep, that's right.
Wonderful.
Very good.
Hey,
it was a pleasure talking to you. I love the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It has absolutely been a pleasure. And for all of you listening, remember, life is here to help you. Every moment holds a gift, an opportunity to grow, to shift, and to become more of who you're meant to be. But it's your job to find it and use it. If you want to go deeper with this work, you can find me at MikeOglesbee.com. Until next time, thanks for tuning in to the What's the Gift podcast. I'm your host, Mike Oglesbee, and we'll see you in the next episode.